So could you talk about your life after David Frost? What projects did you work on before you would work on the show that would change television?
Oh, let's see. I moved to Ireland, came back and did, as I said, did the Jack Show for a year, ABC, and it was. I enjoyed that kind of because I met friends who remained my friends for a long while, and then I came and did a couple musical things for who was the the channel, the PBS channel, and I'm trying to think of we did the Pittsburgh Orchestra. Only it was who was the famous
Andre Previn?
Andre Previn did a show for PBS, and it was with different Broadway composer and all, and he was very, very good. He was very, not only a great conductor, but he was a good jazz pianist, and it was a wonderful show. And I didn't know it was a non-signer of the Directors Guild, and so I got fined by Directors Guild, but it was worth it. Doing that show was just wonderful. So I did kind of a few things like that. I did a few commercials, did a beer commercial, but they would fly me over, and I would go back again. And I remember staying when I was doing Jack Show. My wife will remember this. I was staying at the Plaza Hotel in a suite, and our house back in Ireland was an 18th century house with 12 fireplaces, and it was cold. It was like 32 degrees all the time inside the house. And when I got back, I said to Joan, I said, this is harder on me than it is for you, because I've been living in this wonderful warm place, and now all of a sudden I'm struck. And then I don't think she slapped me, but she wanted to. So things like that happen. And when my son Tony came back to go to college here, and my daughter Martha, and I guess this leads into how I got involved with Letterman.
Yeah, what changed in 1980 when you began with the
Well, what happened was we were back and we bought an old farmhouse in Connecticut. Of course, we liked old housing. We were fixing it up. And I was in town in New York having lunch with some friends, and I was walking down 6th Avenue, and Jack Rollins, who was somebody I had worked with before, he was a Nicholas and May manager. So Nicholas and May were on many of the Parr shows. They were terrific. They just did such good work for us. And he stopped me and said, Hal, what do you, I said, Jack, what do you do? I thought you lived in Ireland. And I said, no, we just moved back. And we chatted for a while. And then he said, it's funny that I just met you, because I'm working at NBC. I have a young fellow who's just signed on with me, and we're doing a morning show for NBC, and they're looking for another director. What are you doing? I mean, are you available? And I said, no, I don't want to work anymore. And I said, well, this fellow David Letterman, and that was the first time I heard that name.
And you had no idea who he was?
I had no idea who he was or what show we're talking about. And he said, well, it's the bad news is that it's probably going to be canceled, not in a week or two. The good news is that I met you, and would you like to do the show? I said, maybe we could talk Dave into hiring you to do the show. And I said, no, I'm really happy where I am. And then I said, what kind of money are we talking about? And he gave me a figure, I think it was like $25,000. And just a couple of days before, I'd been out working outside, and I looking at the house. I said, what the house needs is a great big porch in the back. And I figured it would probably cost $20,000 to do that. And I thought of the show and the porch, the show and the porch, and I decided on the porch. I said, all right, let me, who do I have to talk to? He says, well, you should have a meeting with Dave. And said, are you going to be in town tomorrow? And I was staying overnight. I said, yeah, I'll be in. He said, well, why don't you just have a chat with Dave. I think you'll like him. So we met at Lindy's. It wasn't the original Lindy's. It was a Lindy's at no longer there. It was at 30 Rock on 6th Avenue. And so I meet Jack and Dave, and we're having a sandwich. And when Dave comes in and sits next to Jack, and we have a conversation. And he said, "Oh, I hear you lived in Ireland?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "I always wanted to go there." We had this nice conversation. Didn't talk about the show at all. And then he said, "Well, what'd you do there?" And I said, "Well, we had this old house. We're fixing it up, and I did a lot of gardening, and putting tomatoes up in jars and making sauerkraut." And he said, "Sauerkraut? My father used to make sauerkraut." And so we ended up with a conversation all about preserving foods, and then at the end of it, he said, "Why don't you come in Monday and do the show?" No talk about what the show was like, or what it was about, or what I had done in my life. So it was. I think we immediately liked each other. We just liked each other chatting about sauerkraut, and I see. Jack Rollins wasn't that happy about making a commitment right away, because the producer, what was the producer's name? He hadn't been talked to about it yet.
Right. So was there a thrill of returning to 30 Rock after about 15 years or so?
Not really. I was still convinced I didn't want to work in television,
right.
But the porch won that argument. I said, "Well, I won't have to dig into my income or my savings. I'll get this money." And I figured, well, it'd be fun, because I hadn't been in New York very long, and it'd be a chance to catch up with my friends in New York, and this thing's not going to last, so, yeah.
Now, what was your reaction when you first saw the show, when you were there in the studio watching the show, The London Trip, for the first time?
Actually, I think that was on a Thursday when I talked to Dave. So I did watch the night. Jack said, "You should watch the show before you do it." So I watched it, and I liked the way Dave looked. I liked the way he sounded, but the show itself, it was strange. It looked like a sitcom rather than a studio show. And there was a door. You came in the door. There was like a living room set. And I said, "Geez, that can be hard to do comedy or routines in a setting like it. It'd be too confining." So, but I did. I agreed to do the show. I came in. The rundown was just full of information that wasn't needed. So I said, "Tomorrow I'd like to have a rundown with just the acts, just 1, 2, 3, who's going to be on it. No information about what the chirons and all that." That was another thing. While I was gone, they invented all these new technical things like chirons and different kinds of tape things. So I had to learn about those in that first day. I said, "Chiron, what's a chiron?" "You don't know what a chiron is?"
How also did technology change?
What's that?
How also did technology change since 15 years when you were doing the Parr show? The cameras changed as well?
They got smaller.
Right.
And then you had handheld cameras. Handheld cameras. First handheld cameras were like you needed an elephant to carry one. It was just, so that was good. You can move around. But what I found was the studio was too confining, so I got them to change the studio. And when it ended up, it looked pretty much like the old Parr show. It was a desk and a big opening, sliding doors coming around the corner for guests and all. And it worked out later on because we had acts on. We celebrated the wedding anniversary of a couple from New Jersey, and it was just okay. We had music, we had dancers, but the great thing that happened was that they had sparklers, and the sparklers ignited, and so these old couple from New Jersey were stamping out the sparklers at the end of the show, and it was a great look. Dave was convinced we were all going to go to prison, for burning people alive on the air.
The show was live too.
It was live. Yeah.
So that must have been a difference. For you couldn't have done a live show like this, had you?
Yeah, I kind of like that. It was daring, but changing the set, changing rundown, and then I guess I can talk about how it changed things for me, because I finally found someone who would listen to me about doing really odd things. One of, I talked before about films being an important part of my life, and The Great Dictator was one of my favorite films. And I think Dave was open to changing the show, because we had cooking segments. It was kind of like almost like a typical network 10 o'clock show. And I think he wanted to do something different, and I certainly wanted to do something different. And I remember I said to Dave, there's a thing in The Great Dictator where Charlie goes into a cloud and he comes out and he's upside down and he doesn't know it, and he reaches for his watch and takes his watch and looks at it, and then he lets the watch go and it goes straight up in the air. I said, suppose we open with you, and we'll tie you upside down and then reverse the camera. That's the way you do that. You reverse the camera's on his back, and then you'll say hello, blah 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 blah, and then you'll open the thermos, and the coffee will go straight up in the air. Say, yeah, let's do that. We did that the next day, and then we got a shot of the rig and all, and then people talked about that, and I think that was the very first thing where I saw that he was willing to do dopey things that I wanted to do, and he wanted to do the same thing. He wanted it to, they're practical jokes, actually. That's what they are.
Now, had there been any show like this one, daytime, before?
No. I don't think so. No. It would be, we're not the only, Steve Allen did a lot of really strange things, filling a truck up with ice and, kind of so.
And Kovacs did it. Ernie Kovacs did.
Yeah, and Ernie Kovacs did things that I stole and did them, and they worked very well. Yeah, so it's not new, but it was for a morning audience, and also for an audience that attracted, I don't know why they were up, not in school, but when a lot of school kids were watching the show and wrote in.
So could you talk about your work with the head writer, Merle Markle? And what was her involvement in the show with David?
Yeah, well, Merle was a genius, and she did things like stupid pet tricks. Mm-hmm. Now you say, well, let's do a show where we do pet tricks, but the reason that is so successful, it's called Stupid Pet Tricks, because no one would ever say their pet was stupid. I mean, it's like a slap in the face to America, and I think that's why it caught on. And then people came on, and surprising how many pets do pet tricks.
Now, did you rehearse quite a bit? Because Parr, you did not rehearse. David Frost, you did not rehearse. Was Letterman
we ran through stuff. I mean, it was better, or not better, but more organized than say a Jack Parr routine. And because some of the stuff was kind of complicated, later on we did things where Dave was invited to do surgery. And of course, a big plume of blood would be going up in the air, and that would be the end of the routine. Yeah, and he was willing to, like, later on we did things where actually I was walking bent over, and he said, "Well, what's wrong with you?" I says, "Well, I was working. Actually, I was at home working on a piece of furniture I had just made, and I was sanding it, and I strained my back, and so he said, all right, let's send you up to the nurse's office on the air." And so we did that. So he comes into the control room, and I struggle to my feet, and he leads me out, and they put me on a gurney. They wheel me up into the nurse's office. He's with me, and then he says, "I'm going to leave you here. They'll take care of you, and don't forget we're still doing the show." And so I directed the rest of the show from the gurney with a monitor and all. But so Dave was also good at adding and not only embellishing, but maybe inventing things we could do.
Did you know from the start that Letterman had something that he just could make any skit really funny?
Yeah, you know what he had? He had likability. It's, you look at the guy, you talk to him, you like him. I thought he was a good-looking guy. He was like the handsome boy next door who was funny.
Now, did he ever ask you about Jack Parr? Was he interested in television history, or did he
yeah. In fact, I introduced him to Jack, and he came out to Jack's house, and we were both, Dave and I were both terrible tennis players, but it was a time when everybody played tennis. It was a social thing to do. And so I said I'd been invited to, I used to go almost every other weekend to Parr's house to play, even though he wasn't on the air, to play tennis. And he said, why don't you bring that guy, Dave Letterman. He had never met him, but he says, he's got something there. You got something there. This guy is good. And so we went out, and I said, Dave, I said, it'll be very informal with just Dave, and maybe food will be a hamburger or so. And so we start playing tennis, and in the middle of the tennis, we look up, and the door opens up, and this is a wagon's pushed out with all kinds of hors d'oeuvres and all, and waiters, and then Dave said, "What the fuck have you got me into, Gurnee?" But then they liked each other, and we remember one time we had dinner, and he had some guests on. We had the guy who was at the end of 60 Minutes.
Andy Rooney.
Huh?
Andy Rooney.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Andy Rooney, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. And he was there. And Rooney, it turns out, is really, well, he's gone now, wasn't a very nice guy, actually. And Dave's there with his girlfriend who wants to get married, and he doesn't want to get married. And Rooney says, so you people live together, huh? That kind of thing. I says, well, why don't you get married? And I can see both of them shrinking under the table. So it was a memorable evening for all of us, yeah. And then later, he got his revenge. We did a tour of CBS when we went to CBS.
Yeah.
And we went to Rooney's office. And Rooney had a reputation for, in college, being a wrestler. And so Dave challenged him to a wrestling match right there without letting him know. And then Dave pinned him right away, and he just had, he was like exulted over his prone body. Yeah.
Right. And the producer was Barry Sands. Could you talk about working with Barry on the daytime show?
Yeah, Barry, I like Barry. We got along very well. He didn't get along very well with Dave, and Dave eventually let him go. But he, and then Bob Morton stepped in, and Morton was a booker and real nice guy, fun to be with, and I think he was very good with Dave. He knew how to handle Dave.
Now, what was your relationship like with Dave? You were older. Did you find him as a younger brother or a son, or how did you, or was he just?
You know, we kind of thought alike. So I was like, I could have been like an older. I could have been an uncle. I could have been his uncle.
Right.
But it wasn't that at all, because Dave is kind of, you know, what can I say? He's so unpredictable that you never know. There's no way of measuring a relationship. But he used to come into my office to chat once in a while. He would go by and he would sit down and we would talk. He'd put his feet up on my desk, and I had in my jar a propeller on a stick. I don't know if anybody, you know, it's a stick and a propeller, and you go like that, and it spins around, goes up in the air. And it takes a bit of talent to be able to do that. Now, not everybody can do that. So I would be doing that while he's talking, and then I would shoot it to him, and he would catch it. And he's very, very good. He does that pencil thing. He throws a pencil into a ceiling, and they stick every time. And he took that propeller thing and he went like that and spun it over to me, and I sent it back and forth. And that was the amount. We never talked about the show. I don't think we ever had one conversation about what was on the air. We talked about films and all that. And then one day he gave me, I think maybe my greatest compliment from him. And he said, "You know, Hal, I think you're the strangest person I ever met." And that was it. Yeah. No, he didn't say strange, he said oddest. You're the oddest person I ever met.
So did you get much feedback from the network executives about the daytime show, or did you have a feeling that the show would end relatively soon?
Well, we all knew that we were doomed.
Right.
But the vice president in charge of making shows better, that whoever that is, that woman, we went to her. We would be called down, and they said, "Well, we talked this over. We think we need more cooking on the show." And Dave and I would look at each other. Oh yeah, got that, Hal? Yeah, more cooking. and then they would, things that would be great for a woman show at that time. And then we would go out. We'd be laughing, falling down laughing, and it's. I mentioned this before. The person behind the desk is really the boss. Mm-hmm. You can have all kinds of titles. You can come in with all kinds of briefcases and papers and all. It's the guy behind the desk who runs the show. Mm-hmm. And they never learned that. They never learned that from, but they certainly learned that quickly when he went on the air on Monday.
Well, did NBC know they had a talent at one? The show received a daytime
Emmy,
but
yeah.
did they know that he had to be groomed?
Yeah.
And he could be groomed for another.
Well, from that dopey morning show, they got the Emmy Award, Daytime Emmy for Best Variety Show.
Mm. Did you have a feeling of a different sort of audience that was developing with the show too?
Yeah. I think the audience, I don't know what they were doing watching that time of the morning, but there were a lot of students. A lot of kids were watching, writing in. And actually, I was flattered because after they used to do a thing called, What's Hal Wearing?
Yeah.
And the whole point of it was I wore the same thing. Dave said I'm the oddest person he ever met. Well, I am odd in that I always wear the same thing. And that time I would always have a blue shirt, chino pants, and loafers. And then so let's go in the control room and see what Hal's wearing. And so and I would stand up and say, blue shirt, chino pants, and then people would applaud and we'd go on with the show. Right. And then I get a picture of a school out in St. Louis. And they have What's Hal Wearing Day, and there's like 180 kids all dressed with blue jeans and blue shirt, and that's one of my favorite pictures too. So those dumb things catch on. It seems, well, how can you make fun? What's the deal? Another thing Dave insisted me doing was to introduce and welcome spring and winter, and I used to wear a polo shirt in the summertime when I wasn't wearing my blue shirt, and I always buttoned to the top in the wintertime, and in the spring I would open the top button, and then Dave would say, let's go in the control room and have Hal introduce summer or spring, and I would do the button thing, and it would be a drum roll and then music, and from this we made a living. That's what.
So, do you remember the last show, or was there anything special about the last show on the daytime Letterman?
Yeah, well, I think what I remember best about that, we had the peacock, we had women dressed as birds dancing, and a lot of, and sparklers and all that. It was like a big, we were canceled, but it seemed like we were already successful. So it was kind of nice.
Now, what did you decide to do after the daytime show was canceled? Were you thinking about retirement again, or?
Yeah, well, I retired 5 times. So. Excuse me. Well, what happened? It probably financially the most satisfying thing that ever happened to me. When they canceled the morning show, they went to Dave and gave him a contract not to work for anybody else for a year, and they paid him so much a week, and they did the same thing for me. So I was for a year, almost a year, I was getting paid every week, and when Dave called and told me we were going back on the air, I felt disappointed. I said, "This is the best gig I've ever had."
Now, what did you do in that year with getting paid? Did you?
I worked on my house, yeah. Yeah.
Was it sort of a tacit agreement between you and Dave that when he came back, you would be his director?
There was no it's funny, that's a good question because I never thought of it. I mean, NBC had already given me a contract for not working. Right. So it was assumed that I would be directing when we came back.
Did you have any idea of how you would come back or what time period you would have, or?
Well, we'd taken the fellow who was the place we were taking.
Tom Snyder, yeah.
Yeah, and actually he was a nice guy, and Dave liked him and felt guilty that he was taking that spot, but he wanted to go back on the air.
When did you first hear that was going to be your next adventure with Dave?
I got a call from Dave saying that that the show had been, we were going back on air. They were giving it to Tom Snyder a spot.
Was there great excitement on both your parts about?
He was. I was kind of, as I said before, I was kind of had mixed feelings because who doesn't like free money? I mean.
So were there many plans as to what you would do with this new time slot? Did you sit down and discuss it, or you just end up producing a show?
Well, yeah, I think we just sat down and started producing. Say, well, in segment 1 we'll do this. I'm going, well, it's kind of like the morning show, only after dark. So it was, and also Dave was so good, and I think Merrill was involved in this too. I like, as I said, I liked old movies. One of my favorite movies is Dracula. Not Dracula. The greatest villain of all. I mean, the greatest horror movie of all time. Come on.
I'm trying to think. Frankenstein, King Kong?
Frankenstein. It really, I think about it now, it frightens me, the look they created for him, that look in his face. And so one of the things about the film Frankenstein is that this was made in 1932. But I think I remember the director is Wales. His name is Wales.
Right. James Wales.
And what they did was they opened up with a view of a stage and an audience, and a man comes out in a business suit. He's like the theater manager, and he said, "What you're about to see may startle you, may frighten you, may even," and then he goes on and he said, "And if anybody feels they can't tolerate that, should leave the theater now." So I suggested we do that at the beginning, and we did. And we did, only we used his little funny guy that, what was his name? Trouble with the name again.
Larry Bud Melman? No.
Yeah, Larry Bud Melman. And so Larry Bud came out and did that in a tuxedo, and really satisfied. I don't know if anybody even noticed, but it was. I thought it was just exactly what I wanted to do.
So, were there any other major differences between the daytime show, or you just began?
Well, we had music that Dave liked. The morning show, the music was good, but it wasn't. Paul Schaefer was just the right, because Dave liked contemporary music, and Paul was very good in keeping up with all the music. And we had great music acts. A lot of it having to do with Paul Schaefer's acceptability in that field.
Now, did you have any decision in how the studio would be laid out, and where the orchestra would be, and what the look of the show would be?
It looked a lot like the morning show at the end, with a desk, the doors in the same place. We were still in 6A. I don't think the band is in the same place.
I guess the one difference.
Hey, it's the same studio.
Right. I mean, but this show was owned by Carson, right? Carson Production produced.
Yeah, that's right. There was the difference in technically we were beholden to Carson, and there were certain things we weren't supposed to do. We weren't supposed to do political satire at the beginning of the show. Carson felt, I think, threatened by someone else coming in and stealing the way he did his show.
So,
but he liked Dave so much we could do anything.
But you didn't get notes from Carson Productions about the show at all?
I think the executive producers did, but I never saw them. And we would probably ignore them if we did.
You mentioned the beginning of the show, but do you remember, Bill Murray being the first guest, and what are
I just remember him going nuts, doing a dance and running around. Right. I remember Bill Murray better for coming on once in a while. He was very unpredictable. He always come on with kind of a routine that he had invented, but didn't let anybody else in on. He would come in, and he said, "I got this great idea. I'm going to go out, and then you try to blah blah blah," and then he would hide in the sound lock, which is right off the control room, and then Dave would be waiting for him to come back, and then his joke was he would just hide, he would stay, and there would be nothing happening on stage. And if you're in the business and really serious, dead air is worse than death. It's just, you can't tolerate anything that's, where you're just waiting for something to happen that's not happening, and Dave is even a greater, coward about this. And I saw Murray in the hallway, Keeley, and I was so upset that I ran out, and I said, "Hold the door," and I took him by the scruff and I threw him out on the floor. And they said, "Oh, there you are." Yeah, I remember that moment. It's just stuck with me all those years.
You mentioned the morning show, that when you joined, it was
Yeah.
pretty much a given that you would be canceled. Was there any fear when you began the late night show, or did you know that you would find an audience quickly?
Never occurred to me. Dave worried about everything, so I'm sure that Dave thought, probably you won't be working tomorrow night. You know, I mean.
So you had worked with so many different hosts up until then, from Jack Parr, Gary Moore. How was Letterman different from the ones that you encountered in the 50s and 60s?
Well, I think he was the most unique. He was different than almost everybody else. Jack was a little bit like the guy before him, you know.
Steve Allen?
Steve Allen.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson was a little bit, I mean, all of a sudden Dave is, it's hard to put your finger on it, but he was, I think Dave was the first one who really didn't care if the audience didn't like him.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody else is selling themselves. And I don't think Dave ever did that. I think he liked it when he upset people. Although, because he was such a nice guy, I mean, underneath, and it's hard for people to get mad at him, but I think he would have liked to have been and worked at being, you know.
Would you say that Dave had an on-air persona, or was that, there's not much difference between the Dave you knew off camera and the Dave that we saw?
Pretty much the same person. And Dave could show, you know, exactly how he felt on the air. And, you know, all performers, it'd be hard to think of Johnny Carson being anything else but, you know, the Johnny Carson you see on the air. And actually, he wasn't, I know about him off the air only because of Dave. I mean, he was very, very quiet, and after he got through his drinking periods, yeah, in his early days. But, and Dave spent most of his time in the studio, so it's hard to say what kind of life Dave had outside of the theater.
Now, in terms of production, how did you work with the writing staff in preparing the late night show?
Well, they would write up little sketches, and I would stick to what they were trying to do. And what I could supply was my idea of how to do it. Not, although I did a couple, like there was something called after school specials, and I remember doing one where a kid is very sad, he wants to be a stand-up comic, and I thought it was good, and it went on. But most of the stuff come in script form, and you do it. And if I can help it, I would add whatever I could. Where I could be more useful was coming up with ideas that hadn't been done before, and I take great pride in taking credit for the Skycam. What happened was that a fellow I know who was in the camera selling business came in one day and says, "Hal, I got something new. It just came in from Germany. You're going to love this." And it's a tiny little camera. And you can stick it on anything. You can put it up. It's used for security. It didn't produce a great clear picture. You know, it wasn't high def, but it was usable. And so I bought a couple, and we did something called Skycam, and we hooked it up onto this rigging with a wire that went across the studio from over Dave's desk to over Paul at the piano. And we added a sound effect so there would be a and this camera would be going over, and Dave would look up at it. And then finally we cut to the guy doing it. It was one of the biggest, most unruly looking stagehand doing that. And it became an instant hit. And then we did Thrill Cam, where the camera came down a runway, and then we put it on we put it on a monkey. We call it Monkey Cam.
Did you come up with those ideas?
That was my idea.
Yeah.
And we used a little camera, and the guy says, "This is good. This is the newest LPS." So LPS, yeah, little piece of shit. And that's what they're called. Like, is that right? Little LPS? Yeah.
So did you know these technology experiments were among the most popular things on the show? Did you have a feeling they would go over
No,
immediately?
no. I always said Dave was the most. Yeah. No, I think Dave sold it because he would look up at. I mean, like the cams and all. If it was somebody else, almost. I can't think of anybody who could display it better than Dave. Other people would kind of like be part of the audience looking at it. Dave would be Dave, either resenting it or liking it or telling you don't really understand this. I mean, it was. I think Dave was. That's why he was different. He didn't pat himself on the back. He didn't promote himself.
And were you conscious with these ideas, something Carson would never do? It's not part of the Carson universe at all.
Not until they caught on. When they caught on, Carson was doing routines on the street and all that. And that's what the guy who followed him did. His show for a while was all stuff out in the street.
Well, Marco did a lot of those, shooting on the streets. Could you talk about?
Yeah, we did remotes. We'd call remotes.
Yeah, could you talk about the remotes with?
I hate to take credit for everything, but
You can.
but the first remote was something. It wasn't called a remote. It was. I had this idea that when Dave's at the desk, he could just say, I'm kind of hungry, and he would get up and leave the desk and go out in the hall, and that's when he would just stay there. And then the day before, we made this tape of Dave going in the hallway, down the elevator, and across the street to a hot dog stand and buying a hot dog, and then coming back to the studio. And I said, when you pay the guy, give him the wrong change. And so Dave gives him the money, and he comes and says, hey, where are you going? That's not enough money. So we went back, and that got a laugh. And then the next day we would cut out of the tape to Dave eating a hot dog. And people, wow, how did he get that? How did he go across the street and do it? And so it was a pre-tape. So we did a lot of pre-tapes. But that Merrill was very good at taking the phone book and finding very strange ads and then going to those places. We did one that she did, invented was Nothing But Shades.
Right.
And then Dave would go in and ask for lights, lamps. He said, looking for a lamp. He said, no, he said, nothing but shades. And this sweet old lady. Now, and then to go on and on. And then we went to a place called Nothing But Bulbs.
Yeah.
He says, I'm looking for a shade. What's great about it, it's so stupid. It's so wonderfully stupid.
Now, did your directing style change at all during these days? Were you different than you were when you began with Parr?
I don't think so, no.
So it was pretty. Did you feel freedom that you didn't have before?
Well, there's kind of this nonsense I would have never recommended to Jack, because he wouldn't get it. Jack wouldn't understand what's funny about asking for shades when you're in a lamp shop. I mean, and most of America felt the same way. It took young people to see this ridiculousness as value.
So are there any specific shows you remember? There was the 4th anniversary show that has been written about.
Let's see, we did 10 anniversary shows.
I think you were the first person to direct from an airplane.
Oh, we did a show. That was good. That was a disaster, actually. we hired a plane, TWA, and we had Connie Chung, who was a guest on the show, and she was sexy and wonderful looking, and we had a great big picture of her mounted, and so that the front of the plane had this. It's like back in the war when you had your girlfriend, you put your girlfriend's picture on the plane, and we had Connie Chung on our plane, and we had guests on. We were up in, it was I guess 747 because we had the piano lounge that used to be up, and we did the show from up there, and then we had the B cameras going around getting other shots of people and all, but the one shot we actually got to use was the head-on shot, and all the others had been when we got to Miami, the crew took the B rolls and put them in the back of a pickup truck with I forgot what kind of instrument it was, but it had a high magnetic field to it, and it erased all this, and so all we had was the head-on shots, and I had to make up a show, and I have pictures of the TWA flying here, flying there, and finally we got a call from Washington. There was a law about using, I forgot what the law was, but you weren't supposed to do more than so many minutes of advertising a year, and they claimed that was advertising. So it wasn't a great show.
And then, midway, in the 80s, GE buys NBC.
Yeah, that was a big change.
And, obviously Dave did jokes with the GE fruit basket. Could you
Yeah.
just talk about, the relationship now with your,
Yeah.
the masters who changed?
Well, we didn't know right away that General Electric would be such bad sports. Luckily for us, they turned out to be really bad sports. But and one of the writers, I think it was probably Jerry Mulligan, thought it'd be nice to, or Steve would be fun to bring over a basket of fruit to welcome GE to our show. And we took the basket over, and we were confronted with we were going to see not the president. President was up in New England, but the reigning GE executive were going to bring the basket up to his office. And when we tried to get to the elevator, the security people came, and there was one security man who he looked like the quintessential security guy. He was kind of tough looking and no smiles. And we said we'd like to. He says, no, you just get these people out of here. We had guards, and he was shoving people around. And I said, no, we just want to. And we handed the basket over to one of the guards, and he would do with it. And then, and I reached forward to shake his hand, the security guy, and he reached over. And mid-shake, he realized, and he pulled his hand back. So he used that shot over and over again. It's like GE handshake. It's like that, and he pulled the hand back. And people enjoyed that. We enjoyed it.
Now, did you review the tapes? Did you look at them after the show? Did you or Dave talk about them, or is it?
No, the show was over. We left. The only thing after the show, we talked about how bad it was, or what went wrong, or the lighting was bad in this place, or the sound. Hey, I can't hear the but. So that's, I think that's true of almost, I think really people who get things done generally are not happy with what they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing about Dave, he loved putting the crew into the show. And certainly there were a lot of different sequences with you, the Hal Gurtner sequences, the time killers.
Right,
Could you just talk about them and how they came up to be?
The writers generally did that. The writers saw, I think after after I did a few things on the morning show, they saw I had some value in like having 4 girls come in and sing hats off to Hal Gurnee, blah, 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 and I would stand up and they would do the whole thing, what I was wearing. And I think Dave liked that more than I did. And then we did Network Time Killers, and that was because of the strike. And so some of that stuff, some of the stuff Dave and I had to come up with, like I wanted to have Dave have the first shave and haircut on the air, and we did that. And then we had a guy come up and measure Dave for a suit, and he came in every day for a week with fittings to see how the suit's coming along. And it's the kind of stuff that I always thought it'd be fun to do. I don't know if the audience liked it, but we did.
How did you talk to the writers about that, or did you just say to Dave, "This is a good idea," and then the writers took over? Or
the writers pretty much knew what they wanted to do, and I think if I had any value at all, was that I could add to something or even add a name. I remember we were looking for a name for, who was the little guy? I can't remember his name. That guy is on
Larry Bud Melman?
Larry Bud Melman.
Yeah.
And we were looking for, his wife was on the show a few times, and we were looking for a name, and we had a lot of names, and Dave picked my name, and it was Tiffany. And people just looked at her and called Tiffany. There was a laugh. You just laughed.
Could you talk about some of the other crew, like the announcer Bill Wendell? What is your memories of?
Well, Bill, I knew from the early day. We worked together on the Parr Show, and Bill and Dave didn't. I think Bill was an old timer,
Yeah.
great voice. I liked him a lot. We were good friends. But he was like Don Pardo. I mean,
Yeah.
he was the quintessential voice, the announcer. And the announcers were all interesting. I don't think Dave ever got how interesting the announcers are as a group. They, when I was working at NBC in the early days, the announcers would come into the booth, so I got to know all of them, and they were very, very, very competitive. I remember Don Pardo coming in one morning, and Bill had not broken his ankle, but twisted his ankle. He had to be taken out on a stretcher, and Pardo came in and saw him on the stretcher, and came over and quickly says, "What commercials do you have today?" So so I love that part. It was just like real life. And there was also a kind of a coffee shop, drugstore on the first floor too, where they all hung out. That's why there would be actually a very funny sketch or even a movie about announcers in those days.
And certainly Dave brought the stage manager to the fore with Biff Henderson.
Oh, yeah.
Could you just talk about how Biff, and did he enjoy being on camera?
Biff at first didn't, but then when the money started rolling in, he liked it, because he got paid every time he was seen, or
Right.
we were involved in something. But the stagehands, the New York, I've worked in California, worked in New York. The New York stagehands are the best. They're so quintessential stagehands. I mean, they half the time they're sitting down playing poker in the back of the studio, and they don't try to kiss up to you. When you go to California, the stagehands, first thing they do is come over and say, "What kind of cigars do you smoke, Al?" And they have everything ready for you, and it's kind of like catering to you where you cater to them in New York. And every stagehand has two jobs. He's working for you, and he's also doing lights in a theater downtown.
So could you also now talk about Chris Elliott, who became an important
Oh, Chris was
part
great.
of the show?
Yeah, he was just like a gopher when we first came in, and of course he had a famous father, but he had a sense of humor all of his own, and he was a very good performer. He could do things. I mean, Dave would ask him. We would do a routine where he would be testing different cooking oils, and he would have 2 or 3 bottles of cooking oils and a glass, and he would pour half a glass of cooking oil into it, and then drink it all down, and then pause, and then try another one. And you would be, cooking oil, and then you find out later on it was apple juice, So, but he was very good at making you think that he was drinking the.
Did you rehearse these segments with Chris, or?
Just quickly? I mean, just the glass is going to be here, and there, yeah.
So it was pretty
not.
much live. It was like
much, yeah.
live on tape.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
liked
fun.
working with Chris. He was fun. He was the man under the floorboards, and
Yes.
we did things where he was out chasing criminals, and he was very good.
Now, let's now talk about some of the classic comedy bits that people keep on coming back to. And
Right.
maybe you can tell us the
Right,
origin.
right.
First of all, the Velcro suit. How did that
Yeah.
come to be, and what was that like directing it?
I think that was Steve O'Donnell's idea, because he rehearsed it. He actually put on the Velcro suit, and he did this and make sure it would work, and it did work. I think probably they were looking for in the writers' room, looking for something to do, and I think that was Steve's deal. But the other Steve.
Young?
No, they had his own show. Steve, had his own talk show. I mean, yes. Before Jack, Steve Allen. Damn it, I
yes,
can't
right,
remember.
yes, okay.
Steve Allen. Allen did. I think he did something kind of like that.
Yeah. He was in a bowl of Jell-O, and
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't unheard of. But the Velcro thing was just because everybody's played with Velcro. They're fascinated by the way to have it. But we also did one, and I think Steve was involved, where we had like a ton of aspirin, or kind of sparkling stuff. You take antacids, and we put a bunch in, and then Steve tried it out, and he was lowered into this vest, and we had to haul him out, and he had fainted. He had actually what it had done, it reduced the oxygen, and so he was, we left him there for a while. He would have killed himself. So we did things like that.
And then you had done, stupid pet tricks. Then you did stupid human tricks. How
Right.
did that come to be? And did you enjoy directing that sequence?
Yeah, actually, one of the nice things about doing a show like that, if you're a director, is that if you don't get too carried away, you can enjoy the show as it's taking place, and we would laugh our asses off, with things that really worked well.
Now let's get to probably, the one segment that's now part of American culture, and that's a top 10 list. Can you talk about the first top 10 list and how that evolved over the years?
Well, I think you're going to hear this for the first time, but I believe I'm the one who introduced the top 10 list to the show. And it's not that I'm saying I created the top 10 list. That was done by writers in a room full of writers. But how my story is this: I was on the subway, and I was looking down. There was a newspaper someone left on the subway, and now you can help me with the name.
Mr. Blackwell.
Yeah, and there was above the headline. There's always this little thing they do, and it says Mr. Blackwell's 10 Worst Dressed Men. And so I picked it up. I was reading this, and I threw it back again. That's interesting. And then I said, wait a minute. And I picked it up, and the next day we generally had a meeting with Dave and whoever the head writer was at the time, and the producer. And I brought this paper in with me, and we were pitching ideas. And I said, what about this, Dave? And I threw the paper over. Didn't say how it could be used. And I said, isn't that? And he said, and he just shrugged, and he gave it to, I think, Jerry Mulligan. I think Jerry Mulligan was the head writer at that time. And he says, wait, see what you can do. So Jerry Mulligan took it up to the room full of writers, and I think they worked out the top 10 as it is now. 10 worst dressed men. I thought it would be 10 worst facial hairs on a man. That kind of, something really stupid. But that was the better way to go, to end up with something at the top rather than at the bottom.
Now, did you think that the top 10 list would be like a perennial every night? You could
No,
do
I
something
thought
different.
it would be good for 1 or 2 weeks maybe, and then it would disappear like so many other comedy things. But no, it's like Tonight Show, whatever it is, top 10 list.
Right. And then there were other segments that were a little different for Dave, like Small Town News. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, but see, the funny thing with Small Town News, that's not a Letterman thing.
Yeah.
Parr did that. I think almost everybody who sat behind a desk doing comedy has done something like that. And it's just so, you just see these people and these pieces in the paper, and they're funny. And the funny thing is that the people who wrote them don't know it's funny.
Right.
They're just screwed up.
And the other thing that Late Night was certainly known for was the destruction of things, throwing whatever off the roof. Yeah. Did you enjoy doing those?
I did.
segments?
The one I liked best was we did them all over the place, but we did one on top of a fire tower where they trained firemen up in Westchester County. It was 7 stories high. It scared the hell out of me because there was no railing, and I was wondering, well, you get busy talking, and you're going to back your way off a 7-story building. But we threw things off the building, and then we had a camera, and if you focus on where it hits, and you go later on in slow-mo, you get all wonderful different patterns and all. And we had, probably the most effective one was that we had a springboard at the bottom, and we dropped a turkey, and the turkey hit the springboard and then did this wonderfully gracious spiral in the air, and it fell down again. So we used that a lot.
And you also interacted with your audience. You had the custom-made show. You had audiences vote on segments. Could you just, talk about Dave and the audience?
I think the best audience thing we ever did was, for some reason, without explaining, everybody in the audience was Japanese. and no one talks about it. But I think maybe it's become kind of a racial thing that people don't want to talk about. But we did an opening. I did an opening for as if it was coming from Japan, and now from, the top of the so-and-so building in Tokyo. And then Dave came out and didn't explain why, and we did the whole show, not in Japanese, in English, but I think I don't think people talk about it. But
No, you don't hear that many references. Then there's the 360-degree show.
Yeah, we did that.
Was that your idea?
No, it was one of the writers. You got 12 guys in a room all the week long. They got to come up with something, and so that was one of the things we could do that could happen. Yeah.
Now let's just talk about some of the guests. Certainly, first of all, how would you describe Dave's interview style, his interaction with his guests?
In a conventional interview, I don't think he's who would get the best rating. I mean, he's good, but with certain guests, the one that comes to mind, it makes me laugh every time I think about it, is there was a fellow from Greenwich Village come in, and he did these rants where he would almost
Brother
choke.
Theodore.
Huh? Brother Theodore.
Yes.
He would come on and he would do his typical rant, and he'd go on, he'd stand up, and he ended up with standing in a chair and shouting like that. And then he would sit down. It'd be a long, long pause, and then Dave would say, "Is that a Velcro shirt?" And then you weren't expecting it. So that, comedy is surprise.
Yes.
And so he's very good at that. He's also good at seeing things that you don't see. I mean, he sees things that the writers don't see. I remember we went, the show got invited to Gracie Mansion because it was some award they give every year to people who bring business to New York, and Mayor, trying to think of the mayor's name. Yeah.
Ed Koch or
Huh? One black.
Dinkins.
Dinkins.
Dinkins, yes.
Dinkins was hosted us,
Yeah.
and it was maybe the hottest day of the year, and we were all outside in the tent, and people wearing shorts. In fact, Dave was taking the award, and he was wearing shorts and a T-shirt, and we were all informally dressed. And Dinkins came up to introduce Dave, and he was wearing a tuxedo. And Dave came up and to thank him, and he started kind of doing his reply to this award again, and he was actually reading something, and then he just stopped. There was a long pause, and he looked over and he says, Mayor, the black tie was optional. And we all fell down laughing. I mean, I didn't see that. The other guys didn't see that. I mean, we would have slipped a note up to him and said, ask him about the black tie. But Dave saw that. That's why I think it's a genius.
Now, there are certain shows that sort of got, out of control, when Andy Kaufman especially.
Oh, they were
wrestling
great, yeah,
show.
I
Could
love
you just
that.
talk about
Yeah.
how much they were rehearsed, and did you have a sense of where it was going with when Andy appeared?
Well, he rehearsed by himself, but they were rehearsed. But for some reason I was going through stuff, and there was a Andy Kaufman thing from the morning show where he came on, and he looked terrible. His hair was kind of like matted, and he needed to shave, and he was very glum. He sat down, and he hardly responded to the questions, and he had this wonderful, and he just looked at him. He said, "Gee, maybe." He was so good that you always bought everything he did. You never said, "Well, he's all right." But and then he got up and he said, "It's really been tough on me these last few weeks, and as you can tell, I'm not very well, and so, and I need money." And so he gets up and he starts walking to the audience, holding his hand out, and people are passing down dollar bills to him. And they're not quite sure whether he's acting or not. And I just saw that recently. It just holds up so well.
And how about the Sonny and Cher reunion show? Could you talk about that, when Sonny and Cher perform on Dave's show?
Remind me. I don't remember
Well,
that.
they sort of come together and sing a song.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It
I
made
Got
me
You,
cringe.
Babe.
Made me cringe. Yeah,
No.
yeah. I wasn't thrilled with that. I barely remember that. See, that's how. See, I'm kind of eliminating it from my memory.
Right.
But did they got together and they?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
got back at. They had not been on a show before,
Oh.
for a long time.
And then he skied into a tree. Yeah. Okay.
And I guess one tradition began when Darlene Love appeared on the Letterman show around Christmas time
Yeah.
and sang, "Baby, Please Come Home."
Yeah.
Do you remember it? Did you see that as the beginning of a tradition for Dave?
No.
No.
I don't really remember that. I assured you. Maybe everything on that side of the studio were by the band. I'm not a music enthusiast,
Right.
and a lot of people tune in the show just to hear the band.
Mhm. Now, did you work on the Christmas special that Dave did? It's well-known where he created his own family,
Yeah,
pretending to have his family Christmas.
That was good. That was good. But the funniest Christmas thing happened was the little short guy,
Larry Bud Melman.
Larry Bud Melman,
Yeah.
was dressed as Santa Claus,
Yeah.
and for some reason he was in a sled, and they parked him next to a bunch of books, and everything went well until he reached for the books, and he was supposed to. And one of the books was tricked out to have his line in it, his little story, and he's supposed to tell the night before Christmas story in his sled, and he reaches it, and they put the book in the wrong position, and he ends up with some book on philosophy or something, and he starts reading it. We're all looking at him, what the hell is that? And then finally he just gives up, and I thought it was a great moment for him.
Another guest you had on, a sportscaster, Marv Albert, who did a lot of different races on your show. Did you enjoy
Yeah,
having him on?
he was good. What's good about Marv was that he played along. He didn't try to make his role comedic, but he played the really good, reliable sports announcer. He was good.
Then you had other people from other industries, we'll say real estate, that came on the show. Donald Trump was on your show. Could you talk about interacting with him?
I'll tell you, I hope none of my friends see this. Because, Donald Trump, did I talk about going over to visit Donald Trump at the Golden, the Golden Eyesore on Fifth Avenue? And we were going around with a camera, making fun of the different stores, and then a guy in a black suit, obviously a guard, comes over and says, "There's no filming here, no filming." I said, "Well, this is David Letterman, and he's a friend of Donald Trump's." Just a minute. She goes over to the phone conversation, comes back, says, "Mr. Trump wants to see you." So we go upstairs with the camera, and Trump greets us. He's got this great big office with boxes here and pictures of every building and every cover of a magazine he's been on, and he says, "Sit down," and he takes us. Then he takes us around to every. He says, "Here, and this is Time magazine in 1987, and then here's a building I'm going to build." And I wish it was in Moscow, but it wasn't. and he's very nice to us. And we orders up, "You guys hungry?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm hungry." And so some sandwiches come in. So we spent like 2 or 3 hours with him, and he couldn't have been nicer and gracious. Then I found out later on he's the most dangerous man in the world. Didn't think so at the time. And then one of the good things for me is that he was going to be on in a couple of weeks, and I went to the booker and I said, "When Mr. Trump's on, tell him that the director, if you want to look good tonight, the director needs an apartment very badly." And the next day I had an apartment, 100 Central Park South, 10th floor view. I had to pay for it, but there it was. So he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
And you also had, 2 talk show legends on the show. Jack came on the
Paul,
show. Could you
yeah.
talk about his, interview with Dave?
Yeah, Jack liked Dave a lot, as I said before. And one of the things back in the old days, we had the Muppets, the Muppet creators on.
Jim Henson.
Yeah, and they were in one of the dressing rooms all by themselves, and they went into a closet that had steam pipes, and around some of the pipes there were this kind of mushy stuff you put around to insulate them,
Right.
and they did a whole village of Muppets on this, and then that door was closed up and sealed over, and I knew about it because I think when we were doing the show, we sent a camera in and showed it, and then when Dave had Jack on, Jack said, "Is that those things still in the closet?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we did a reverse on Dave. I said, "Do you want to see what we did in our day?" And they brought him out, and there was that display of stuff.
Well, that's now a part of the NBC tour.
Is it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so
Still
now
there?
it's still there, yes. It's
Yeah. History.
right. And then, in addition to Parr, Johnny Carson, obviously close to Dave's
Yeah.
formation, been on the show. Could you talk about working with Carson? You never really had directed the Tonight Show with him. What was
No,
it
I
like?
only had one experience with Carson. That was we were doing remotes out in California, and actually, Dave and Carson didn't live too far apart. Dune Point, or and so it was a deal where Dave was broken down. One of the sketches was Dave was broken down with his car, and Johnny Carson drove by in an open car, and I had to go over and tell Carson where to look, and he was very, and so it was funny. So he drives up in the open car, and Dave's broken and trying to change a tire, and Carson looks at him and then just looks back and drives off. Doesn't help him at all. That was the joke. But he was very cooperative, and he and Dave got along very well.
Now, did you watch any of the Tonight Shows with Carson just to see what they were doing, or did you while you were doing the Late Show, or not?
I don't think so, no.
No.
No, I saw reruns of things, famous moments.
So, any other shows that we didn't mention that come to mind that we should think about?
Let's see. Did we talk about my days at Carnegie Hall?
Yeah, talk about that. Yeah.
I can't.
Let's
Let's see.
Break it all before
What?
we go into late show. Are you good? Do you want to break